Master the trigger run, and you'll become a true FC expert. The trigger run is the most common attacking tool this year, but there's one misconception we must address. A trigger run doesn't necessarily have to create a one-on-one opportunity to be considered successful. Instead, by constantly using trigger runs in your attacks, you clarify your passing lanes. That's the true purpose of the trigger run. Let's start with the basic inputs. There are two types of trigger runs. The first is via L1 plus pass, commonly known as the give and go, which makes the passer run forward. The second is when you're in possession while controlling the ball, press L1 while pointing toward a direction, and the player in that direction will also make a forward run. Sounds simple, right? But if you truly want to master the trigger run, to use it fluently, it still requires a lot of practice and learning. I've summarized a few common mistakes beginners make. If you feel you're already quite skilled, you can skip ahead to the second half of the video. First mistake, beginners often lack a clear passing plan. They tend to press L1 on different players one after another. Here's a key point. If you trigger a run on player A, then trigger a run on player B, player A will stop running. If you then trigger a run on player C, player B will also stop. At any given moment, you can only have one player on a trigger run. There is one exception where you can have two runs at once. First, use a give and go pass to send one player forward, then press L1 on another player, and both will make forward runs. The second mistake, after triggering a run, players instinctively press controlled sprint to try to beat their defender. But controlled sprint R1 and the button to call a player back are the same button. When you're using controlled sprint, it's very easy to accidentally call another player back. Once you call a player back, the player who was making a run will also be affected. They will stop moving and stop their forward run. The third mistake, and the most serious one, is that after triggering a run, you fixate on that player and feel you must pass to them. That's not how it works. When you trigger a run, if you notice the opponent has already read your passing intention, then don't try to force the pass. The opponent has already moved someone to cover. Passing at that point is pointless. It will either be blocked or intercepted. Instead, wait and see if the opponent disrupts their own defensive shape. At that moment, you can trigger another player to make a run. If the opponent's center back is caught out of position, you can easily use this second trigger run to create a good scoring chance. Beyond these common beginner mistakes, how can you truly become a master of trigger runs? The most important thing is to learn to conceal your passing intentions. Here's a key technique to remember. Don't wait until the ball is at your feet to trigger other players. Instead, while the ball is in the air or en route to you, decide who you want to trigger. And before you receive the ball, you've already triggered them, already sent them on their forward run. Then, when you receive the ball, you can move in the opposite direction, or whatever you choose. So you must remember this technique, trigger the run before receiving the ball. To help you understand, here are a few examples. First example, this is a defensive recovery in the back. My De Jong has already triggered a run before receiving the ball. Nico is already sprinting. The movement here is all meant to deceive the opponent's defensive focus, keeping their eyes away from the far side. By the time they notice, my Nico has already reached a wide open area. Even if they switch to CB, it's already too late. This is what it means to conceal your passing lane. The second example, first, I make a simple trigger run. Nico runs forward and finds some space. But the opponent has already noticed Nico's run and switched to their CB to cover. At this point, continuing with Nico is no longer effective. However, I notice the opponent's defensive line because they moved Maki to cover Nico. There must be a gap between the center backs. So I pass the ball to Wirtz. Before receiving the ball, this is key. Before receiving the ball, Wirtz triggers Bomardi to make a forward run. After receiving the ball, Wirtz only needs a slight adjustment to play a through ball through the middle. Bomardi then easily finishes the shot. Third example is a bit more complex. I'll give you 3 seconds to guess. If you were in this situation, how would you organize your attack? Well, actually, I intended to pass to Hansen. Putellas' forward run was just a decoy, meant to mislead the opponent's defensive focus. So when did I trigger Hansen? Actually, when Wirtz received the ball here, I had already triggered Hansen. Passing back to De Jong was only meant to draw the opponent's attention to the center, causing them to overlook my overlapping Hansen. So it becomes very easy to create a one-on-one opportunity. That's the beauty of trigger runs. After watching these examples, I'm sure you'll have a deeper understanding of trigger runs. Let's summarize. The core of trigger runs is to divert the opponent's defensive attention, creating a blind spot, and then use the speed advantage your player already at full sprint versus the defender just starting to move, to play a through ball or long pass. This speed differential is also why players often feel their defenders, even at max speed, still get beaten. because at the moment the pass is made, your defender hasn't reached full speed while the attacker already has. So they easily get onto the through ball. That's why in this version, through balls and trigger runs are so powerful. That's the basic logic behind trigger runs. Now that we've covered the fundamental techniques, how do you develop an expert's mindset? Here's one approach. The simplest way is to watch how high-level players use trigger runs and analyze when they trigger a player, how their passing sequence develops. By imitating their approach and practicing consistently, you'll definitely become skilled at trigger runs.
Like and save. Check before kickoff. Score one more.